Let's talk about this threat on three fronts. Obviously, we've got COVID-19, we've got the flood and hurricane seasons, and thirdly, the depletion of our local government revenues as a result of the pandemic. Of the 1.7 million coronavirus cases in the U.S., nearly 50,000 of them are along the Mississippi River, but only 4 of our states currently are showing increases. This morning, at the start of hurricane season, we want to share what the current state of readiness looks like for our major storm events during this pandemic. Mayors are planning, contracting, and arranging for the sheltering of evacuees and working to meet PPE needs of our first responders, public works employees, other city employees, and our volunteers. If a hurricane approaches and the Mississippi River is at or above flood stage, what will that look like for our cities? How will this be addressed? We have some experience up and down our corridor. Several hurricanes have made their way up the Mississippi River in recent history, including Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Isaac in 2012, and Barry just last year. We've assembled a selection of mayors on the front lines of this pandemic and the worry about our pending hurricane season. They've had similar experiences and are ready to give us some clear perspective. Our federal partners are also on the line to help us assess the risks we're facing and coordinate a response. I'll hand things over to my co-chair from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Mayor Sharon Weston Broome. Your Honor, very nice to see you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Gallagher. There are 2 big differences between past hurricane seasons and this one. One crucial difference is the river continues to be near or above flood stage, and it has been since 2018. Secondly, our cities have been working and coordinating at quarter scale at a new level to prepare for overlapping disasters with the pandemic, and it looks like we've gained some valuable ground. We have secured 40,000 units of additional PPE for our cities. We've launched an international COVID-19 coalition that includes 7 global corporations and organizations that has added to our capacity. We partnered with Rotary International to secure COVID response micro grants for large and small cities from Iowa to New Orleans. We've been working to link our cities as much as possible with CARES Act funding, but that funding is slow in coming for many areas, and a lot of our communities are still sustaining the debt and financial drain of addressing last year's historic floods. Now we're engaged in developing a long-term recovery strategy or our economy, which is partly dependent upon another stimulus package that includes revenue replacement for local governments. Finally, in working with our federal partners at USGS, NOAA, Department of Commerce, and the Department of the Interior, we have developed a set of tools contained in the new disaster prediction and assessment portal built for our cities along the Mississippi River, which includes flood potential analysis and inundation prediction data, which tells us where flooding is predicted to occur. I'm now going to introduce our friends from NOAA and USGS to go over the threats we face from this hurricane season, considering the potential flood from the Mississippi River. We're joined by Dr. Suzanne Van Kooten and Jeff Gratial from the Lower Mississippi River Forecast Center. Mr. Gratial? Is Mr. Gratial on the line?
He is. He might be muted.
Okay, let's unmute him or help him.
It's the
Okay.
Can you hear me, Mayor, now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Star 6. Thank you. My name is Jeff Grushaw. I'm the Service Coordination Hydrologist for the National Weather Service Lower Mississippi River Forecast Center. We're one of 13 different river forecast centers that forecast across the country. Our area actually forecast operations is in the lower part of the Mississippi Valley, which covers Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee, and parts of other states across that area. We work closely with the USGS Corps of Engineers Tennessee Valley Authority to produce forecasts on the Mississippi River. And our forecasting starts a little bit where the junction of the Ohio and the Mississippi come together at Cairo, Illinois, and we forecast downstream to New Orleans, Louisiana. As far as the hurricane outlook for this season, NOAA released their 2020 Atlantic hurricane season outlook on May the 21st. That outlook called for a 60% chance of above normal activity for the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and the Atlantic basins. This outlook calls for 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10 could be hurricane, and 3 to 6 major hurricane. Factors that are determining for the above activity for the Atlantic basin are the INSO neutral trending towards a La Nina conditions, warmer sea surface temperatures are present, weaker than normal wind shear, lighter Atlantic trade winds, and enhanced African monsoon season. And the National Hurricane Center just now, over the next 5 days, is also looking at an area of disturbed weather. Actually, the remnants from Tropical Storm Amanda that was in the Pacific has moved into Mexico. And over the next 5 days, they have an 80% chance of maybe some development in the Bay of Campeche and the very southern portions of the Gulf of Mexico. So that would be something that we'll be keeping a very close eye on in the coming days as to whether that we do get development, and if we do get development, where that motion of this particular system may go. As far as the Mississippi River, we're in a little better shape than we were last year. We still have flooding conditions at Baton Rouge, Louisiana, but we're about 8 feet lower than we were last year at this same time. Last year, we were, the Corps of Engineers had to operate the Bonnie Carey Spillway to actually alleviate flood and stage levels at New Orleans. But this year, we're thankfully, we had peak levels in the middle portions of April, and the river has come down several feet from those higher stages that we had in April. So right now, we are looking at peaking conditions. We had another heavier rainfall that fell over the Ohio Valley and the mid-Mississippi Valley about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And we're getting cresting conditions now at Cairo, Illinois, where the Ohio and Mississippi River come together. Those rises are going to take another couple of weeks before they make their way down towards the Baton Rouge and New Orleans area. But we're only looking at rises of maybe 1 to 2 feet here over the next 2 weeks. After that, we are seeing indications of really falling conditions on the upper part of the Mississippi and on the Ohio River. And what we typically have this time of year is we start to see gradual falls as we go into summer and getting down to very low levels by the time we get into October. So we really have probably seen our peaks that we've had for this season, at least on the lower part of the Mississippi River. And we should start to see gradual falls as we go into June, July, and August. As far as the outlooks that we're looking at over the next 16 days or so, we really don't see real heavy rainfall in the upper valley to generate any more crest on the lower part of the Mississippi River. But certainly we're going to have to watch any rainfall associated with any tropical system that we get here over the coming weeks to see if that changes any of our conditions. And with that, I will turn it back to the mayor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gratial. For more response capabilities and eyes on the ground around impacts, I will bring up Holly Wires, who is the USGS Regional Director for the South Atlantic Gulf and the Mississippi Basin.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. And I had hoped to get together and meet with you guys earlier this year when Scott Morlock was able to make it. And so maybe at the next meeting, I'll get to meet many of you in person. But I'm the Southeast Regional Director. So the states of Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi and Tennessee are all within my region. And I also have the USGS lead for handling hurricane response for the Bureau within the Southeast region. So all of the activities are really run out of my office. And so as many of you know, the mission of USGS is to serve the nation by providing reliable scientific information to describe and understand the Earth, minimize loss of life and property from natural disasters, manage water, biological, energy, and mineral resources, and enhance and protect the quality of our life. And as we enter the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season, as well as the hurricane season in the Gulf, the USGS is prepared to provide science that can help guide efforts to protect lives and property if a major storm makes landfall this season. USGS typically takes a response posture when it comes to how we handle hurricane efforts. And so before a storm's expected landfall, the USGS coastal change experts forecast how a storm may reshape the coastline using the USGS Coastal Change Hazards Forecast Model. These forecasts can then help emergency managers make critical decisions before a major storm strikes, including which areas to evacuate, which roads to use, and where to position storm cleanup equipment. The forecasts typically begin 72 hours before a storm is expected to make landfall and are updated on the latest forecast information that the National Hurricane Center provides to us. And these are available on our website for the USGS Coastal Change Hazards portal. And so once we've determined a hurricane or a tropical storm will likely strike the coastline somewhere, and if it's deemed safe and necessary, we will deploy field crews to the storm's projected path along the coastline and install special water level measuring instruments called storm tide sensors. These sensors record data that track the storm tides and coastal flooding, and then that helps USGS and the NOAA scientists improve their forecast models. We may also install rapid deployment gauges at locations that are not monitored year-round with permanent stream gauges, but are at risk of flooding due to the approaching storm. These gauges would then provide real-time information on water levels, precipitation, wind speed, humidity, and barometric pressure to emergency managers that need to track the floodwaters. This data also informs NOAA National Weather Service flood forecasting, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers flood control decisions, and supports state and local decision makers. Once the hurricane has passed and once that we've deemed that it's safe to do so, we will then deploy field crews again to travel to the affected areas to make real-time stream flow measurements. And we're going to verify the accuracy of those stream gauge readings and quickly repair or replace damaged or lost gauges that may collect high watermark data, which FEMA would then use to steer their relief efforts. In addition to the on-the-ground efforts, we also have the USGS National Geospatial Program, Geospatial Information Response Team, the GIRT, which also provides key information on multi-layered digital maps or on printed maps that can provide a big picture view of the storm's impacts or a close-up of a specific community. They developed the MRCTI Disaster Prediction and Assessment Portal, which is kept up to date so that mayors and their communities will have the latest publicly available satellite or other imagery and information to assist the management of resources and mitigation of impacts due to flooding. I just want to assure you all that during the COVID-19 pandemic, USGS still stands ready to provide hurricane and storm event support to our partners and the public. The safety of our staff is paramount, so we are following strict guidelines to keep them and the public safe. During flooding in the Mississippi River watershed this spring, our hydrologists were able to safely obtain critical flow measurements and other data to support our partners and emergency responders. We will again do this through any hurricane response that might occur this year. And so I do want to assure you that we will continue to do our best to provide the science support needed during any future hurricane, flood, or other storm events in a safe and effective manner. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much, Ms. Wires. Using this information as background, our mayors now share the steps they're taking on hurricane preparedness and how plans are altering to deal with the pandemic. Here in Baton Rouge, we are preparing for high probability of a major hurricane by using the valuable lessons learned from the other storm events Mayor Gallagher mentioned. In fact, during Hurricane Barry last year, valuable inundation mapping provided to us by USGS through the disaster portal enabled us to make plans if the storm stalled and caused a catastrophic situation. Also, we are looking at the procedures and plans that were put into practice during the H1N1 outbreak of 2009, which overlapped with that year's hurricane season. Our overall pandemic hurricane strategies include evacuation, sheltering, resource management, and health and medical. We document our added pandemic hurricane operational considerations as an annex to Parish Emergency Operations Plan. This annex includes considerations of social distancing, personnel shortages, personal protective equipment, surge and rescue items for mass care, and sheltering that will better prepare us for responding to multiple incidents. However, the most critical element in all of our preparation is communication. We have been meeting with all of our public and private sector partners and stakeholders and with our volunteer organizations to ensure that we address any planning gaps or operational needs. We have prepared communications that we can quickly deploy to the general public as well. And we want to make absolutely sure that everyone, from our emergency personnel to our most vulnerable citizens, has the most timely and accurate information so that they can make informed decisions. We've also created an all hazards recovery plan to align any needed recovery efforts with our state and federal partners following the National Disaster Recovery Framework. Just as we plan, train, and exercise our response plans, our recovery plan addresses principles and roles and responsibilities in a coordinated structure. Overall, we will continue to coordinate and communicate with all of our partners in case we either have to activate our plans and achieve them, or if we are requested to assist our neighbors in any way during the hurricane season. I'm now going to recognize my sister friend, my sister mayor, just south of me, New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell, for what her city is doing to prepare on the front lines.
All right, thank you, my sister mayor. I had to make sure I was unmuted. But before going forward, thank you all for your leadership, as well as for your support during this pandemic. The PPE that we received, that 5,000 extra units, made a huge difference. And I have my Director of Homeland Security here with me, Colin Arnold, who is the overseer of that and makes sure that PPE gets distributed to all the right places. And we just thank you so much for that. As it relates to us in our preparedness for hurricane season, let me tell you, as Mayor Gallagher mentioned, we're juggling many, many balls, not just with the pandemic, of course, during hurricane season, but here in New Orleans, even as relates to how we pump water out of the city when it floods. And so that is a key component with our Sewage and Water Board. In December of 2019, oh man, we had a huge tragedy here. One of our, we call it our turbine number 5 is what we call it. It exploded. And this was about 25 megawatts of power that we would depend on every single year for redundancy, because the power allows us to operate our pumps and therefore pumps water out. And so we have had to work tirelessly to make up for the lack of redundancy as we're now in hurricane season. And without that redundancy, we know that we have a challenge and we're starting at a deficit. But we have, in order to address this now, a turbine costs about $20 million. So this isn't something that the city can move on right now to fill that gap. But with additional EMDs and generators on site and other processes that we have embedded in our procedures, we feel that we are prepared, along with the 99 pumps that are all working in at capacity, which is, again, a big deal for us, because when our administration came in, about 2 years ago, this city had not had 99 out of 99 pumps working in over a decade. So again, while we are in the midst of and we see challenges, we're also making significant progress. As mentioned earlier, the High River, we're not where we were last year. So that's a good sign. And it's expected to continue to go down, which is also great. But I was able to get a better understanding of how that works, meaning with the High River, I was given an analogy that if you have a hallway full of people, and that's almost like a high river, and if you have a hurricane, it would be that water having to make its way through a crowded hallway, full of people. So that kind of relaxed my anxiety just a little bit, even in the midst of a high river that we see is going down. We have our city assisted evacuation plan in place. We have, of course, had to tweak that a bit, being in the midst of a pandemic, not being able to, have folks, 50 people on one bus or on full of trains with the social distancing that has to remain intact. So we have made sure that we have enough buses on hand, that we have just solidified our partnership with Amtrak to get our people out of the city should a mandatory evacuation be called. And this is something that the city has not had to call for in a mighty long time. So we are really pushing back on complacency, getting our people to understand that in the midst of this pandemic, you need to leave. It's safest for you to leave. And that's also something that we have to continue to talk about, because the fears and the anxieties that are real in the community, people may feel that it's safer, for them to stay on, but it's not. And so we're doubling down on our efforts. Also with our evacuation spots, we have 17 of them throughout the city. We'll be making sure that our folks are equipped with an N95 mask, that they have, all the necessary resources to be safe while we get them out of the city and out of harm's way. FEMA published its most recent guidance for hurricane sheltering and evacuations on last week, and I'm happy to confirm that our plans and processes are aligned with that. The New Orleans Health Department, we're continuing, of course, to manage our shelters. We put in guidelines last year for our nursing homes to all have generators in place. So we have made our way to all of our nursing homes to make sure that their plans are in place and that they are, at the capacity to either shelter in place or get out of harm's way should a mandatory evacuation be called. So it's a lot of moving parts, of course, in coordination with our regional leaders, as well as keeping our medical monitoring facility or station that we had to stand up with state officials and our federal partners, again, to respond to COVID in our city. But at the same time, continuing to stand that up in the midst and during hurricane season should we need to activate it. So with that, thank you so much for allowing me to share a little bit, but I appreciate you all's leadership and having one another's back as we move through this historic time, not only in our city and state, but in our country, and of course along that Mississippi River that connects us all. So thank you so much. And Sister Mayor, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Cantrell. We really appreciate your thorough update and insight on what's going on and what you anticipate in New Orleans. So now we're going to move upriver to mid-Louisiana, where Mayor Buzz Craft of Vidalia is preparing. Mayor Craft?
Thank you, Mayor Brown. I'm getting a bad echo. Can y'all hear me?
We can, I think, try it now.
Is that okay? I've got a bad echo, I'm sorry.
got a bad echo on this end. Mayor, I might suggest that you just could you hang up and then dial right back in?
Is it still? Can you hear me now?
We've got a big echo coming through.
Okay, I'll try to get back on.
Mayor Kraft, while you're working out your technical difficulties, which shouldn't take too long, I'm going to bring in Mayor Kevin Smith of Helena, West Helena, Arkansas, who has been dealing with flooding, tornadoes, and a compromised levee all during the pandemic. And then we'll come back to you, Mayor Kraft. Mayor Smith?
Okay, thank you, Mayor Brim. Sorry I had to get unmuted there. This is Kevin Smith in Helena, Arkansas. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Continue.
Okay, good. Here in Helena, Arkansas, we've already had a bit of practice in dealing with these multiple events at the same time and evacuation and disasters. As Mayor Brim mentioned, in April we were hit by two big storms simultaneously, tornado, flooding, and we also had, of course, in fact, the storm was on the first day we had our first death in COVID-19. We've also experienced full-on hurricane activity, even 375 miles north of New Orleans, believe it or not. Hurricane Katrina was so large that we felt the hurricane level effects here in Arkansas, and you can see the outside of that bandsaw that they show on TV as the center was hitting landfall. That was so big that the outside bands of it were hitting Helena, Arkansas. For us, with the release of FEMA's new guidance on sheltering and evacuations, we are now reaching out to our area hotel companies to establish sheltering contracts in the event that we need them for a large-scale event. I can tell you that additional PPE is a big part of the process. I need all the PPE I can get for not just first responders, public works, and volunteers, but also my food bank workers and other essential service personnel. In America's smaller towns, it doesn't take much contagion to have an impact, so we need to keep vital city operations running, and that means more PPE. We haven't seen CARES Act funding yet, not sure when we will have it or how much, so I need to do what I can to prepare now. I can't wait until an event occurs because just responding without protection can spread the virus. So I would say, like I said earlier, we have already this spring dealt with the issue of multiple crises at the same time. And one of the first problems we had was keeping everybody mindful of the COVID issue and protection while helping people out of ditches and helping people out of their homes who were shut in by trees that had fallen and people that couldn't get without electricity and all the essential services. And so our first responders were needed immediately. Our hospital was cut off from anybody going in or out. The power was off. Our 911 service was off. Our dispatch was off. Our cellular service was down in some areas, all at the same time in the middle of the night. And so you immediately stop thinking about COVID and those issues. And so we've been through this already, and it's very difficult. So we're better prepared in that sense. We know what this is like, but we also know how unprepared we really were. The rainfall events from hurricane season are our biggest concern. Stormwater runoff that backs up into our sewer. We have an old National Guard armory that we have recently reacquired, and we're trying to update and modify to get ready. We've had testing and training here for all of our city employees and hospital workers, and contact tracing. We need more PPE, and MRCTI has been amazingly helpful, more helpful to my city, frankly, than anyone from the government. And I can't thank them enough. We're looking at our pumping stations that pump the water out of our city into the river. We have a levee on one side and a ridge, Crowley's Ridge, on the other. So we also have sort of a natural bowl effect when these things happen. So we have a lot of challenges, and I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate you this morning, and appreciate you sharing with us what you have gone through and anticipate. Now we're going to go back. Right now, we're going to go back to Mayor Kraft. From Mayor Smith to Mayor Kraft. You ready, Mayor Kraft?
I'm ready. Thank you, Mayor Broom. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay, well, I'm so sorry about the other. Look, here in the day, we sustained the longest flooding along the Mississippi River last year. It was like 270 days, and, you know, the river really hasn't been down to normal levels since early fall of like 2018. So we're definitely preparing for a hurricane impact if that river will be high, because, you know, last year, thankfully, Barry kind of didn't stall over our region. If it had brought a significant amount of rain along the stem of the Mississippi River where we're at, it could have been a pretty bad problem. So, you know, in the past, when Katrina hit in 2005, Vidalia took in a lot of evacuees from New Orleans. You know, I personally had family. We had 4 or 5 families staying between me and my mother here in Vidalia, and we have a convention center that's equipped to be a shelter. And we have put together partnerships and materials that we need to retrofit the facility for, you know, the pandemic. Specifically, we need partitions and screens to limit the contagion. And, you know, we're working with state, the Corps, FEMA, and also the Red Cross to make sure we have what we need in place should that need arise. And we're also, you know, MRCTI has been very great in helping us accumulate additional PPE for and help us look and address any of those things. I really want to thank those people and everybody who's working hard, that we work together. We're all in this together. And I do want to say a shout out to our mayors in the bigger cities who are also going through the things that we see. Our prayers are with you, and we just pray that we did in this, you know, to take care of one another, and that's take care of where we live. I think one of the main things we're going to need to do here today is make sure if something does happen, that if you have a large group of people, that the testing for people when you get them in for any kind of evacuee, that they can be tested. You can identify anybody who's sick rather quickly, and maybe try to get them quarantined as quickly as possible, and actually have a written out plan of what that would look like. So with that being said, again, thank you all, and I pray for your safety, and I pray for a safe hurricane season.
Thank you, Mayor Kraft. We appreciate your insight. I'll conclude so we can get to some questions from the media, but just briefly, here in the Quad Cities, we've sustained the effects of hurricanes in the past, and we're certainly no stranger to the flooding that has been discussed. To prepare for these natural disasters, we've done all kinds of evacuations and sheltering, as have the mayors up and down the river. We make these emergency contacts with our area hotels so that we can put folks up in the hotels, especially as this contagion continues to rear its ugly head. We too have attempted to stock as much PPE as possible thanks to the MRCTI. We've received some help there, but we've also been very diligent about trying to establish a stockpile that we can use in case of these disasters that we are discussing today. So now we'll open the floor to questions for any of our mayors or agency guests. Please state your name and your news outlet before you ask your question. Go ahead if there are questions.
And remember, *6 to unmute.
Hi, this is Abby Wendell. Can you hear me?
Yes, Abby.
I am with NPR. And I would just love to hear a little bit more from the mayors about specific plans for using hotels as shelters. Is that something that everybody is planning to do? how are are those like in contract negotiations right now with the hotels?
Abby, I'll kick it off. This is Bob Gallagher, the mayor of Bettendorf. Here in the Quad Cities during the pandemic, we had our shelters for homeless people shut down, and we needed to find other avenues. Obviously, with the pandemic, our hotels were basically empty. It was a great partnership, and here we've had great success in reaching out to our hoteliers during the pandemic, but also during other events like the flooding of last year. So if there are some we do on a contract basis, but really that's a less of a negotiation and more of a partnership, if that makes sense. They certainly give us a better rate than they might give a customer based upon the number of rooms and the things that we're doing, but it's a good cooperative effort here. I'll move down the river. Mayor Sharon Weston Broom, what are your thoughts? Do you guys use your hotels in Baton Rouge?
Well, I will tell you, Mayor Gallagher, and to the reporter, that right now we have a framework in place of potential shelters where we will certainly be practicing the principles needed in a COVID-19 environment, and that those shelters have become a little bit more numerous. But of course, hotel availability is another part of our process when and if needed. Absolutely.
Other questions?
Yeah, hi, this is Travis Lux with New Orleans Public Radio. I'm wondering, so members of the public are probably understandably frightened. I think y'all kind of alluded to this too, understandably frightened about, the idea of like sheltering with a bunch of people during a pandemic in a very group type setting. So what should members of the public know about sheltering in the pandemic if needed? Like how is it going to be safer for them?
I'll just give my 2 cents quick, and then maybe we can move to Mayor Cantrell of New Orleans. Here, when we were sheltering as a result of the pandemic and pushing, ensuring that our homeless folks had a place to stay, we were testing. We were placing those who may have been positive or tested positive in the past, or believe they were around somebody who was positive, and therefore through the contact we were able to establish that they were presumably positive. They were housed in a different location so that we could continue to social distance, continue to use all of the CDC guidelines, and keep people living separately. In many instances, a hotel room is a larger environment than a shelter is for our homeless on a regular basis. So this was another step to be able to social distance. And maybe we'll have Mayor Cantrell talk about New Orleans since you're down that direction. Mayor Cantrell? Maybe *6 or Mayor Broom?
Yeah, as I recall, the question was focused on, once again, what the repeat.
Sheltering and how people feel being a little bit worried about the COVID situation, and how are you as mayors dealing with the COVID situation in a sheltering environment?
Right. And so you heard Mayor Cantrell talk about reinforcing the message. So we've had to do that as well here in Baton Rouge. We've had to simultaneously, as we've worked through COVID-19, we've also been preparing folks for a COVID-19 hurricane season. And so when we have already looked at the design of social distancing, we've told people about that. Our all hazards recovery team has, which is compiled of stakeholders from throughout our community, nonprofits, business, et cetera, everyone that would be involved in a response. They are now in the mindset of helping us to stand up in a COVID-19 culture. So they're using their resources, insight, whatever they bring to the table to help us make these needed adjustments. And so I think that certainly the consistent message and the bigger picture remains that we have to certainly be, as we say here in Baton Rouge, red stick ready. But our red stick ready has now transitioned or transformed, if you will, into red stick ready during a pandemic. And so while there are changes, most of the changes have embraced what we already know we should be doing in a COVID-19 environment. For example, making sure that we have enough PPE for folks coming into a shelter, in addition to practicing the social distancing, making sure we have a pet-friendly shelter for people, and making sure that we have a place for folks to go who may already know that they're COVID-19 positive.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other questions? Well, I'm sure that Sharon and I would both be available if you had any questions. You're going to get the press release from Mr. Winter. If there are any questions or you'd like to reach out, certainly feel free to do so. At this time, I'll conclude the conference and thank everybody for being on this telepress conference with regard to our hurricane preparations during COVID-19. Everybody stay safe, and we thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mayor.